Hey guys, welcome back to another Vanguard video. Today we're talking about 100 Demons and Ikazuchi, the first villain deck we got revealed. We still don't know when we're getting Kyoryugain, likely next Thursday, because this Thursday is going to be Bastion plus a new Dragon Empire Rideline, and we know next Tuesday is going to be the Nanaclair and new third mythics. But anyways, we're here to talk about 100 Demons. So here's the flag, pretty straightforward. Alright, so we have the grade 1 leader of the 100 Demons, Ikazuchi. So auto when placed by riding from Parade of 100 Demons. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 from among them, put into drop and shuffle the deck. So check top 7, selective mill. This is really good because it sets up your Thunderclaw Narukami, which you can then arm from drop, or any of your Thunder Mines, which you can get into Yamigedo Soul later. So just selective deck thinning to set up your game plan for later. And then you have the grade 2 Superhuman Might Ikazuchi. So auto when placed by riding from the leader of the 100 Demons, Ikazuchi, which is the grade 1. You look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card with Thundermine ability from among them, reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle the deck. So this is really good because a lot of your early game rears are Thundermines, so you can easily set up like a grade 2 or grade 1 to beat your opponent's face early. And it's also a good setup because you want to accumulate lots of Thundermines for Yamigedo's Thundermine because it gets all of the Thundermines in its soul. So honestly, really solid stuff. I do think the Rideline is really good. And now we have the grade 3. The grade 3 himself, Lightning of Beginnings, Thunder of the End, Ikazuchi. So active Vanguard Circle. Once per turn, you cost counter +1. You choose up to 2 non-sentinel 100 Demon unit cards without Yamigedo with different card names in your drop and call them to Rearguard Circle. So CB1 for +2, honestly, really solid card. You can't grab Yamigedo, and there are also no cards that search Yamigedo, so you kind of have to hard draw him. You're definitely playing him as the buddy of the deck, because you definitely want 2 on your board when we get to him in a second. But honestly, really solid effect. Like CB1 for +2 units to attack with is really good. And then you have 100 Demon Sorcery, Evil Pulse, so active Vanguard Circle. Once per turn, cost pay gauge, choose your opponent's rearguards, retire it. So easy retire. Also 100 Demons Gimmick was also there retiring their own cards, which ties into the arm, or the item, which we'll get to next. So we have Thunderclaw and Narukami here, arms to the Vanguard, so just like Bav, you kind of just arm it and it stays there. If the new item is armed, you put it into drop just as a note. And then continuous, this card can be played from drop. So when you mill this off the ride line or ditch it from ride deck early, just, you know, it's a 0 shield, you get to equip it. I think you definitely want to play 4 of this. Maybe you could lower the ratio just because this card doesn't actually sacrifice itself like the Katana World item, and it just keeps alt effect. So honestly, once you see 1 of this, you're like, you don't really need to see another one for the rest of the game. So it's like easy charge and draw fodder. But just because you can mill it off the ride line and it's very consistent, it's really easy to pitch. And there's also really good pitch fodder in the form of an order, which we'll get to later. So continuous Vanguard Circle during your turn. All your front row units get plus 5k, and this is really big because a lot of the buddy fighters, so the main Vanguards in the Buddyfight collab, suffer from not having good Vanguard columns. So automatically your Vanguard's going to be 18, which is pretty annoying. You do wish it was like 23, but I mean, you can always put a 100 Demons booster behind there, so you know, plus 5k to your front row, including your rears such as Yamigedo, will make them be hitting for 18. And then active Vanguard Circle once per turn. Choose your rearguards. If you chose a unit, retire that unit, and your Vanguard gets crit +1 on a turn. And again, this is super easy because, you know, you have Ikazuchi CB1ing, calling 200 Demons with different names, and you're also going to have the set order that calls your 100 Demons back too. So very solid effect all around. I think this is definitely one of the best items we've gotten for Buddyfight. I think the Katana World was really underwhelming. Tetsuya hasn't really gotten one. And I think the Dragon Empire one is okay, but it's a little bit awkward. I do think Gold Ritter is obviously the best one. But yeah, Thunderclaw and Narukami, really solid stuff. Plus 5k to front row. You know, when it gets the crit just by killing a rear, it doesn't kill itself at the end of turn either. So you don't even need to rearm it, even though, you know, rearming it is free because it has no arm cost. But anyways, really solid item, honestly. Alright, so I want to go over Yamigedo before we get to the other cards. So, of course, we have the big bad boss himself, Great Fiend Yamigedo. So, call cost, pay 2 gauge, and put 1 or more up to 300 Demon rearguards into this card's Buddy Soul. And this is basically just to accumulate more soul for Soul Guard, and as well as his continuous, which is Rearguard Circle. This unit gets all of the Thundermine abilities of this unit card's Buddy Soul. And Yamigedo, just to note, is the only Thundermine here that minuses power from your opponent's Vanguard, because it's very similar to his Thundermine where you're basically punishing your opponent for nullifying an attack. The other rearguards have Thundermines which minus power during your opponent's turn when they place, and I think this is really interesting because it's kind of similar to how it works in Buddyfight, where you basically are auto-responding and then dealing them a damage. But, you know, in Vanguard, dealing damage would be kind of too much. I think minusing power is a very interesting mechanic because it's very easy for this deck to set up early game with 100 Demons, bash face, and then you're kind of punishing your opponent for kind of committing rears unless they have Surgaon or Shenri. Anything that's making like 23k columns or being, you know, 18k, 18k or 13k boosters. And you're basically, you know, punishing them for having to commit rears early and, you know, try to rush you. Anyways, let's continue with Yamigedo. So auto Rearguard Circle, his skill is really good. At the beginning of your main phase, you choose a card with Thundermine ability from your drop and put it into this unit card's Buddy Soul. So basically, you're selectively grabbing a Thundermine from drop, and there's also a card that selectively mills a Thundermine monster from deck. And you're basically setting up multiple Thundermines, which is really, really, really good because you know, you get more soul for Yamigedo, so anytime he would leave the field, you know, for the continuous soul guard, just a reminder, for those who don't, you know, haven't played Buddyfight, when this unit would leave a rearguard circle, you can put a unit from this card's buddy soul to drop to stay on rearguard circle. You can use soul gold when this card would leave a rearguard circle, you can put this card from your unit's buddy soul and drop and have it stay on the rearguard circle. So we're assuming anything that nullifies abilities, such as like Sacrifice Glass, will get rid of it, Lock will get around it, but anything else like Bind, Retire, Removal, swinging into it during battle phase, keeps it on the board. So Yamigedo is going to have a lot of soul very easily. And he can also get his own Thunder Mine. This card doesn't say you can't get Thunder Mines of cards of the same name. And his Thunder Mine is really, really strong. So Thunder Mine, auto rearguard circle once per turn. When its unit's attack does not hit, if you have a Vanguard with Ikazuchi, choose one of your opponent's Vanguard and it gets power -5 until end of turn. So kind of like Welsh's operate mechanic to -5 and retire opponent. Rearguard, except, you know, you're not retiring an opponent's rearguard here, you're just minusing 5. And again, this Thunder Mine is once per turn, but because it gains all Thunder Mine and Soul, you could have multiple of these once per turn. I'm assuming, you know, I'm going to wait for rulings for when that happens. You know, with 2 Yamigedos on your board and, you know, having 2 Yamigedo Thunder Mines and Soul, because you're going to guarantee 1 Yamigedo from Buddy Call, you could essentially -20 from your opponent's Vanguard, which is pretty scary. And he has the double attack ability, so auto rearguard circle once per turn. At the end of the battle, this unit attacks. If your Great Rearguard or Vanguard is stood, you can CB1 stand this unit. So essentially what you're doing is swinging Yamigedo, then Vanguard with 2 crit, and then Yamigedo is already stood, you know, from each double attack. So honestly, really solid stuff. Also, stacking a lot of Thunder Mines mean you're minusing your opponent's power really fast. Spoilers, a lot of the Thunder Mines are -5 and not -10. So a little bit weaker compared to, let's say, like a modern overdressed unit or DivineZ unit, let's say like Levy Dress, you know, which is minusing 10 and drawing 1. There is a lot of really easy draw in this deck, which I think makes it one of the stronger Buddyfight decks in my opinion. But, you know, I haven't play tested it yet, but, you know, so far from the impressions from the deck, that's what it's looking like right now. But I think Yamigedo is a really good card. Only weakness of the deck, I would say so far, just from impressions of the Rideline and going over all the cards. You know, we are going to get more card of the days, but there is no guaranteed way to search Yamigedo. And, you know, Ikazuchi has that built in, which I think is ironic that he cannot call Yamigedo from drop. So you can only basically call off your grade 2s and grade 1s like Pernida and whatnot to basically set up your board. But I mean, it's still good early game. You don't really need to always have double Yamigedo because, you know, every CB for the restand is an extra attack through double attack. But I mean, being able to stack Thunder Mine is really good. Again, we'll wait on the wording, but because usually Vanguard is once per turn per card, you know, unless it's basically only the hard once per turns like Buddyfight, like the named ability once per turns in Vanguard, are basically only if you have like the V wording where it's like this card's named ability can only be used once per turn, and it'll usually say that. So I'm assuming that you can get 4 of those Thunder Mines off to -20k to your Vanguard. You know, if you get 2 Yamigedos set up, it's easily 20k, or sorry, 10k, and then, you know, you have 4 Yamigedos, it's 20k. So very easy power reduce and honestly really solid stuff. So yeah, I think Yamigedo is a really solid card. There's a lot more to go through and a lot of cards that really make Yamigedo shine once you have more Thunder Mines set up. Alright, so I'm going to quickly go through a lot of the units that have pretty straightforward Thunder Mines. So we have Peluda, which is, I said Pernida before, probably thinking of like Bleach or something. But we have Peluda here, which is his Thunder Mine, auto rearguard circle once per turn. He's a grade 1. When your opponent's grade 1 is placed, if you have Vanguard with Ikazuchi, that placed unit gets power -5 until end of turn. So very similar to Peluda's original Thunder Mine, which is when your opponent calls a grade 1 or size 1 monster, you deal them 1 damage. So this card's really nice because if you are slamming this going first, if your opponent tries to slam any boosters or AK to your AK going second, they're not going to be hitting because, you know, this once per turn is going off and it'll be reduced to a 3k booster. And you also have the next card, which is Zazamera, which is the Thunder Mine of auto rearguard circle once per turn. When your opponent's grade 2 is placed, if you Vanguard with Ikazuchi, that placed unit gets -5 until end of turn. So going first, you can really cripple your opponent's numbers. It is once per turn per card, just like the original abilities, because the original Zazamera and Peludas were once per turn per card. But, you know, a lot of the cards in Vanguard are grade 2 and 1, and it's very easy to have multiple of these per turn. On your board, so you can have them proc multiple times per turn per card. So for example, if you have 2 Zazameras is what I mean, and your opponent calls 2 grade 2s, you know, you're minusing 5 that twice. It would go on standby and I assume will proc twice. You know, I do want to wait for like rulings to confirm that, but usually that's how it works for these on place effects. Usually we don't have a lot of this stuff in Vanguard. This is more so like a premium thing than standard. But yeah, honestly, really solid stuff. Like impacting your opponent's numbers, my -10 is, I think, is really strong, and Levy Dress has shown that. It's just that with the power creep of current overdress, you know, looking at Bav, your Vanguard columns and your rear columns are really massive now, reaching like 30 plus. But, you know, anything getting numbers down to like 20k or less makes guarding so much easier with a 15k that I think this is like goated enough where you can really just kind of be greedy and play these cards and punish your opponents trying to commit and attack you and making your guarding a lot easier. Also, these cards are really easy to revive from drop back by the set order, and also slamming these early to rush your opponent is really good because not only are they like having to ask for 5 or 10k shields in order to guard, maybe 15 depending if you put it behind ban. Putting Peluda behind ban, swing pass is also really easy, and if they call any boosters, those columns are going to be so much easier to guard. So yeah, I'm kind of yapping a lot about just these Thunder Mines, but they're very simple, only -5, not -10k like Levy, but again, you can have multiple of these 100 demons on your board, and because you're in standard, you're going to want to slam them anyways because they're going to come back and you want to get cards out of your opponent's hand, and these Thunder Mines will activate once per turn per card, which I think is really strong. Alright, next up we have Stranger Dilemma. We have Thunder Mine auto rearguard circle once per turn. When your opponent plays an order, if you have a Vanguard with Ikazuchi, you choose on your opponent's rearguard, gets -5 until end of turn. Stranger Dilemma was the Thunder Mine when your opponent casts a spell deal damage. He's kind of like the evil captain answer. Honestly, probably not the greatest. I think you're probably going to play maybe 2, maybe 3 of this. Because not a lot of decks actually play it on normal orders, besides maybe decks that are playing like Regulus pieces if they have the space. But I think definitely Zazamera and Peludas are a lot stronger because you want to really cripple your opponent's early game when they are basically trying to play rears and basically punishing them for aggroing you. Alright, so we have the Ice Prison Emperor Cocytus Greed, the Gauge Stealer himself. So auto, when it's placed on rearguard circle, you can put the top 2 cards of your deck into your Gauge face down. So, kind of accelerating your deck out, which is a little bit of a problem. Thankfully, with a set spell we'll get to later, which is your main Gauge resource, Starved Yamigedo, this set spell does Gauge from drop and not from deck. So you're kind of just using this as a little greed to get the 3 Gauge for his second act, which is the act on rearguard circle. You pay 3 Gauge, choose when your opponent's rearguards, and retire it. So between this and Ikazuchi, you can technically get 2 retires every turn, which is honestly pretty good. A lot of standard decks right now don't really have good easy retire, which is kind of surprising. I think the easiest one to point out would be like Gandiva. But I mean, a lot of decks actually don't have that much removal, at least in the meta right now. I guess Bav nukes front row, and like there's some other stuff, but not really a lot of decks are like removing 2 rearguards in a turn. So honestly, really solid stuff. And then auto rearguard circle when it attacks, if your Vanguard is great through greater, it gets +5 cancel in a battle. So again, not checking your opponent's Vanguard. So with this, it's basically reaching 20k with the Narukami Claw, giving 5 to front row. So honestly, I think you do have to play this card just because of the Gauge. The extra retire is really nice. 3 Gauge is very costly, but as an Ancient World monster, that's his thing. And then on attack, he's the only thing getting power in the deck besides basically Narukami giving power to front row, because Yamigedo himself, actually, that we just looked at earlier in the video, doesn't actually have any power gain abilities. So, your numbers aren't actually the greatest. You're relying a lot on Yamigedo's Thunder Mine of them not guarding the attack. So, Cocytus Greed is a little bit strange because you do want to play him just for the removal, but he is a little bit costly. At worst, he's just a 15k beater, and you can easily res him back from drop, just to get that 2 Gauge again off the rad line. Sorry, not off the rad line, off the set order. Cocytus is your best beater in the deck, essentially, besides Yamigedo, if you can't afford to have or don't find 2 to have in your front row. And then his auto rearguard circle skills, you're going to get +5, and once you stack that with Thunderclaw Narukami or with the Dragon World set order, which we'll get to later, gives him another +5. He's honestly making decent numbers, asking for 15k shield. So yeah, honestly, Cocytus is like a solid card for the deck. I'm saying solid a lot, but he adds the second retire, he adds an easy Gauge, you can also res him back off the set order, and he honestly makes the best numbers if you don't have 2 Yamigedos in your front row. Alright, next up we have Eliminator, Glasya, Labolas, and he is Thunder Mine, auto rearguard circle once per turn, where your opponent's rearguard power is reduced by your card's Thunder Mine ability, so basically the Thunder Mine ability procs. If you have a Vanguard with Ikazuchi in its card name, that opponent's unit gets another -5 until on a turn, then costs, you can counterblast 1, draw a card. So really nice that the CB is not tied to the Thunder Mine. Thank goodness. This is also a reference to his X version, where he deals an additional damage and draws 1, so they kind of combine that into this. So honestly, another -5, really nice. When you commit this early, because he's a grade 1, very easy to do. You can have him in the back row if you're scared of losing him to not have that draw 1. During main phase between this and Pernida, they commit a grade 1, you -5 it twice, it's 0 power, so you don't even have to guard it. So honestly, Glasya is really good. Easy, solid CB draw 1. Your CB is basically only taken out by Ikazuchi and Yamigedo because, you want a CB 1 to salvage 2. You do have the set order, which we'll get to later, which can revive 100 demons a turn. But, for Ikazuchi, you want to be killing 100 demons every turn, or retiring 1 to get that crit. But honestly, this card's really good. CB1 to draw 1 is, of course, very good. Your Thunder Mines are really easy to get off because a lot of decks in Vanguard basically always call 2-in-1s. So, like, having Pernida and Peluda, or sorry, not Pernida. Peluda and the other grade 2 are going to be making, your Thunder Mines getting off really easy. And then, once you have this and the grade 2 one as well, if they call it grade 2, you'll minus that 5 and then minus that 5 again, so it'll be 0 power. So I think Labolas is a really great early game card. You do want to basically save your CB for Van, and you do have the buddy call once per game to call out Yamigedo and CC1. You don't have to use Yamigedo's double attack, you're just a 3 attack deck if you don't. But I mean, honestly, Labolas, there's not too much else to say. It's really good. It's an extra Thunder Mine, another -5. 10k increments makes a big amount for guarding, unless, you're fighting a deck that has giant columns like, Bab with like Trick Moon becoming a 25 booster. But yeah, honestly, Labolas is a really good card for the deck. Alright, so next up we have the set orders. But before we get to the set orders, we have User of Darkness, Dunstan. This guy's pretty straightforward. So call cost, pay a gauge. When he's placed on rear guard circle, search your deck, drop or face up cards for up to 100 demon set order. Put into your order zone. If you search the deck, you shuffle it. And if you put a card from your damage zone, you put the top card deck into your damage zone. And we're assuming this, does not work like all the other effects where you don't do a trigger check, like all the standard put top into damage. So really solid card. You're basically playing one of each set order because they basically say you can only have one of each in your order zone. And this guy lets you play 1-1 ratio of each. And then he's also just 1 gauge really deck than a 0 shield out of deck. So honestly, really good card. He's also very easy to commit turn 2 just to rush your opponent and tri-lane them, which is like very important in standard and makes like the Buddyfight decks one of the strongest decks easily to like just tri-lane while gaining resources. So really solid card. Alright, so next up we have Starved Yamigedo, one of the more iconic set spells, I would say. So it's a Danger World set spell, and you have continuous. You can only put 1 Starved Yamigedo in your order zone, and again, it's a set order. So auto order zone, when this card is put into your order zone, your damage check reveals a card, or your unit is retired from rear guard circle. You choose up to 100 demons from your drop and put it into your gauge face down, and none of this is once per turn. So this card is your main gauge resource. It's giving you a bunch of gauge. Again, you can only have one of these in your order zone. Once it's put in, that's 1 gauge. Every time you're taking a damage, that's 1 gauge essentially. And it's really easy to set up because when you're soul guarding with Yamigedo, you'll be putting, 100 demons back into drop, and you'll also be guarding with them too. So filling up your drop zone with 100 demons is really easy. Again, you're also pitching for ride deck. Any 100 demons you pay for cost from gauge will go into drop. So very easy to set up a lot of 100 demons. And then when your unit is retired from rear guard circle, this is going to be happening every turn on turn 3. Once you equip Thunderclaw Narukami, retiring your rear guard circle, getting a crit, and getting that extra gauge. So lots of easy gauge. You don't have to worry about gauge in this deck. Definitely not going to be a problem. We did not get an impact revealed for this deck. There is basically only 2 options, the TD impact and then I forgot the name of the Narukami arts. The one that basically nukes your opponent's board, destroys monsters, and deal damage that he used in the anime. But yeah, honestly, this card is really, really easy gauge. I think this card is amazing. Again, it's an easy one-off because you can tutor off Dardan. And let's look at the next 100 Demons formation. Alright, I kind of spoiled the name by saying 100 Demons formation, but we have Thunder Mine Stance with Gao in the art. So after set order is played, it goes to the order zone. Again, it's a set order. So continuous, you can only put 100 Demons, Thunder Mine Stance, in your order zone. And then the act in order zone is once per turn, you cost pay 1 gauge, choose up to 1 grade 2 or less card with the Thunder Mine ability from your drop, cult to rear guard circle, and if your Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, that unit gets +5k until end of turn. So you can play this as early as turn 1 and basically start tri-laning your opponent immediately because it's a grade 1 set order, which I think is amazing. You likely want to get Corrupted Fuchigami up, which is the next set order we'll look at, but I mean, this card is pretty amazing. It also helps set up 13k boosters for the deck if you call it grade 1 that a friend noted to me. So I think that is just amazing. Like being able to get any of your Thunder Mine units back, unless they're stuck in like the soul of Yamigedo, but like for the good Thunder Mines, like the grade 1 and 2, you're going to be calling them out a lot anyways and trying to stack those abilities in Yamigedo's soul. And, once you have this, set up, once you're on turn 3, you basically get a 13k booster or, a grade 2 getting +5 in Narukami. You're hitting very easy numbers and hitting over defensives while they're still in grade 2. And that's not even including Yamigedo's Thunder Mine. So yeah, the +5 stack really fast in this deck and they're really easy. You don't have to really use any CB. It all costs gauge and the gauge is fueled very easily through Starved Yamigedo. So honestly, this deck is looking very straightforward to use and very strong in terms of just utilizing Thunder Mines very easily. Alright, so the next card is Shrine of the Corrupted Fuchigami. So this is your draw 1, the classic. It doesn't gauge, unfortunately, but has the usual text of set order, continuous, you can only have 1, and then auto order zone, once per turn. When your rear guard with the Thunder Mine ability is placed, draw 1 card. So very solid stuff. You're definitely going to want a hard mulligan for this, because as soon as you play this, and as soon as you play any Thunder Mine unit once per turn, you're just drawing 1. And this also works when it's called off Ikazuchi or off the Thunder Mine stance, because it doesn't say it has to be placed by card ability. So you can play it from hand or off anything else and just, you know, it's a really good card. Draw 1 is hard to complain about. Unfortunately, there is no bottom deck. There's no anti-deck out in this deck, unlike Tetsuya, which has the on the Vanguard attack skill. But I mean, because you're gauging from drop, unless you're playing Cocytus multiple times, you're probably not getting too close to deck out, and you can probably close out games enough because of stacking Yamigedo's Thundermine, where games hopefully won't take too long, and again, your Vanguard will also have a crit. So honestly, really solid stuff. Shrine of the Corrupted Fuchigami is just a good card all along. Alright, so a card I kind of skipped over earlier because it was later in the reveals is Hasted Evolution Yamigedo, and this Thundermine is auto root guard circle once per turn. When your opponent's grade 3 or greater Vanguard attacks, if you have Vanguard with Ikazuchi in its card name, that attacked unit gets minus 5k until end of battle. So very basically tailored to your opponent's Vanguard restanding, essentially, is what this card is basically punishing them for. Minus 5k is really small. It shouldn't like impact, let's say, like Overlord or Minerva's numbers too much. But I mean, it's interesting that it's here and it can make a difference, especially if we do get other Buddyfight decks that restand, such as like Jackknife Gold Ritter. But I mean, you know, Gold Ritter will be 20, he'll go down to 15, then still have Jackknife Baby boosting him for 13, so not too much of an impact. Minus 5k is pretty weak. I wish it was minus 10 and they buffed it just because of like Vanguard swinging numbers, especially because a lot of Vanguard restanding decks will usually give triggers to their Vanguard and go all in because they have 1 or 2 extra swings, or you know, they're threatening lethal and then they'll give power to the rears on side. But yeah, honestly, very interesting card. Just has, you know, to give your opponent's Vanguard specifically the power because it's very faithful to the original. I kind of wish this Hasted Evolution Yamigedo had a second rear skill to kind of tutor out and during final phase like the original to call it a Yamigedo. But, you know, it is what it is. Unfortunately, it only is basically anti-Vanguard restand. Alright, so the next card is Demonic Wave 100 Demons Akishoki, and this card is an amazing card. It's almost like a custom card. It just plays that good. So it's like Dragon Wisdom, where it can be played from drop, like a lot of the modern day normal orders. And then you can play this card with cost pay 1 gauge. So you bind it, draw 1, search your deck for up to 1 unit with Thundermine ability, discard it, shuffle your deck. Then if your damage zone has 3 more cards, you draw 1. So kind of similar to the original effect, where if you had 6 life or less, you get to draw 1 and then draw 1 again. So kind of like Abyss Symphony, you know, those kind of cards. But like, honestly, this card is amazing. You bind it, you draw 1, you don't get the gauge refunded, but you have so much gauge already through Starved Yamigedo, and then you get to selectively deck in 1 card with the Thundermine ability. And while, yes, you could selectively deck in a Yamigedo and get double Yamigedo Thundermines, I think it's a little bit tough because you'll only have 4 Yamigedos unless we get like O Yamigedo or other cards revealed that are better beaters. I think you could get away with 1 Yamigedo, 1 Cocytus Greed in the front row because then you're only doing 4 attacks instead of 5. You kind of settle to be more of like a control deck and less aggro. But I think in the end game, you do want 2 Yamigedos in your front row because they're really hard to remove with Soul Guard. And again, at the beginning of every main phase, you know, Yamigedo is refueling his soul and getting more Thunder Mines. So I think this card is amazing. I think ideally you want to probably mill 1 Yamigedo. You know, I haven't playtested the deck yet, but ideally you probably deck in 1 Yamigedo, buddy call 1, and then find another one. Because, you know, if you're playing 1 as your buddy copy, you'll only have 3 in your main deck, so it just kind of sucks that you're deck thinning 1 because, again, you're going to hard mulligan basically to have your set spells early, or sorry, your set orders, and then having that 1 Yamigedo that you want set up because your buddy cop will guarantee you the second one. So yeah, honestly, this card is just amazing. Like, it's just, 1 gauge is a very easy cost for this deck because you have so much gauge. It's just draw 1 and then selectively deck in anything for your deck, and then draw 1 again if you have 3 or more damage. And it's really nice that it's 3 and not 4 because 4 is usually like your lethal range in Vanguard, because if you're at 4, you usually want to guard a lot of attacks because any single crit makes it lethal where you would be sent from 4 to 6 damage. So this card I think is amazing. If you do get punished or if you do get rushed and your hand was that bad, filled with 0 shields, let's say, and you had to go to 3, this card just reads draw 1, deck thin, and then draw 1 again, which is really, really good. So not too much to say about this, except this card is probably one of the best cards in the deck besides the set orders, which are all amazing, honestly. Alright, so the last card is Gedo Shield. So continue with Sentinel. Again, you can only have 4 Sentinels in your deck, so he's basically one of the basically Blitz Sentinels of the deck because there's no Elementaria. So you play this with cost, discard a card from your hand. If your order zone has a parade of 100 demons. Well, actually, no. We don't know if you can play Elementaria, so I just want to correct that there. We're still unsure on that, but we know the Buddyfight OT is not a Cray OT, but it's nationless. So we're assuming you can play Elementaria, but I don't want to say we can for now. So just want to disclaim that. But anyways, you play this with cost, ditch 1 if you have a parade of 100 demons. Choose 1 of your units. It cannot be hit until end of battle. And then the secondary effect is remove this card, cost pay 1 gauge, choose your opponent's rear guard, gets -5 until end of battle. So very interesting that it's another -5 because, you know, usually when you PG, you want to impact like a giant swing and just perfectly guard that, you know, for yourself so you don't explode. But the -5, I guess, could come up with the other Thunder Mines to basically save yourself another 10k shield in your hand. So I think against decks that are very wide in terms of numbers, this is less impactful. But against anything that restands, such as like rear guards, I don't know, like Shiranui, like what are easy restanders that like aren't Bav and Yugma Shad? A lot of things. I guess you could bring up like Bat and other whatnot rears, but anything that has a rear that isn't giant and massive, getting that -5 is actually pretty impactful. Unless you're fighting a Crest deck and they've scaled like multiple times. But besides that, Gedo Shield I think is very interesting. Unlike the other Blitz orders from the other worlds, I mean technically this is a 100 Demons card, it is from Dragon World, but you know, technically the other Blitz orders that remove themselves get resources. You know, Magic Wheel gets you a normal order from drop, Katana gets you a free ninja. So I think this card is very interesting that it's not getting you a +1 back to your hand, but it's instead saving you hand, but you do have to pay that gauge. But you know, with Starved Yamigedo, every time you're taking damage, you're getting a free gauge. So very, very easy. And again, you also have your charge and draw at the beginning of every turn to give like my wrap-ups of the deck, because usually I end up spending like 5-7 minutes talking about like the wrap-up of the deck and like weaknesses and thoughts. Again, I haven't play tested it yet, but I do think this is actually one of the stronger Buddyfight decks compared to, I would probably put it in either in the middle or right below Tsuku. It's kind of hard to say for now. Tsuku definitely still feels like the best one so far, especially if you can play Valnut with Dispersal. But I think Yamigedo has a lot of really good strengths with Ikazuchi. I think getting that 5k for free to all your front row units is very strong. The set order basically making any of your grade 1s that come back, such as Peluda, you know, getting that, being a 13k booster and then minusing 5 to all boosters is really nice. For example, if they have Sergeon, you're basically neutralizing the basically +5 that he would get from the effect. I think being able to stack Thunder Mines is very strong because Soul Guard is such an easy way to counter removal in, you know, the Vanguard collab. It's very strong. Anytime we would leave Rear Guard Circle by effects or by battle, he just Soul Guard, you know, get rid of a Buddy Soul, he remains on the field. And because you can easily stack Thunder Mines through milling through the normal order we looked at earlier, as well as the Rideline, as well as just, you know, guarding in general before your turn begins during your opponent's turn to get those cards from Guardian Circle into drop, it's very easy to set up those Thunder Mines to stack for Yamigedo. And, you know, every turn that Yamigedo isn't being dealt with, he's basically getting the extra Thunder Mine. So usually, you know, without playtesting, I think you'll probably want 200 demons into his soul for cost. You know, it's very easy to get them back between Ikazuchi. But I do hope that a lot of the decks will get more CC, or at least some kind of conditional CC that isn't the Buddy Call. Because, you know, looking at Ikazuchi, you probably want to spend 1 CB on Yamigedo, then 1 CB on Vanguard skill to +2. So, you know, building a board is very easy, and Yamigedo will stick around because he has Soul Guard. But, you know, to spend that CB on double attack is very costly because you basically have 2 CB a turn. You can stay at 1, but again, there's no counter charge. If you stay at 1, you have the Buddy Call, you go to 2 CB, but then you're not doing 5 attacks because you can't double Yamigedo. So the best thing I think this deck is doing is having 2 Yamigedos. You know, ideally all 4 Thunder Mines set up, because you'll have the Buddy Call and then 3 in main deck. Because, you know, every time your attack does not hit, you -5 to your opponent's Vanguard. So, you know, on your Persona turn, he'll be, you know, +10 to front row. Narukami's giving +5 to front row, so he'll be 28-28. So asking for 20k shield from your opponent. And then if they guard any of those, you know, -10k to your opponent's Vanguard, you swing your 2 crit van. Peluda, let's say, is a 13k booster if you called it off the set order. So he'll be 13, your van's 18, so 31 to crit, kind of weird number, which is what Buddy Fighters are usually left to in this Vanguard collab, but something like that. You know, your opponent has to guard. And then if they do, you know, another Thunder Mine is activating. So, you know, they're going -5 again, going to -15 or -20. So, you know, hitting like, you know, your Welstra operate numbers. And then you still have giant rears on side with Yamigedo. Yamigedo won't actually be that big. Kind of weird. He doesn't gain +5 for having Ikazuchi Vanguard. But, you know, he has a lot of the text that references his repeat version to make him very strong. So I think that's there. And it is really nice that you could technically stack, let's say, like Hasted Evolution, Yamigedo's Thunder Mine to like debuff your opponent's Vanguard when they restand. But, you know, a lot of the times, you know, -10k isn't really enough, and that's assuming you have 2 Hasted Evolution Yamigedos. But anyways, I think the deck is looking very strong. The early game is really good. The set orders are all amazing, honestly. I did not think they would be that good. They're very faithful to the original, that's for sure. And again, I think the only problem right now I can really see is a little bit of CB and finding Yamigedo, because there is no, like the secret orders from Triple D that do let you search Yamigedo. And again, Ikazuchi cannot grab Yamigedo from drop. But I mean, besides that, the deck really doesn't have that many weaknesses. I think it's very easy to rush early game and kind of like punish your opponent through those Thunder Mines if they try to commit and easily guard. You can honestly be fine without having any CB. It's just you want that 1 CB every turn, at least for Vanguard skill. And then, you know, if you don't have the extra CB afterwards, you're still just a 3 attack deck with kind of mid numbers, honestly, for a DivineZ. But honestly, I think the deck looks really fun. I think in terms of like creativity and, you know, accuracy to the faithfulness of the original abilities from Buddyfight, I think the team did like an amazing job. I do think Yamigedo is really good, especially compared to the Rebi. Thankfully, it grabs from drop and not from deck, but I think if you grab from deck, honestly, it would probably be too much of a deck out issue. And again, you have that selective deck then through the order just to draw one and then get a Thunder Minus drop, which you can then put into Yamigedo Soul next turn. So yeah, very easy to basically get the pieces you need. Maybe I think the deck might need like maybe a check top 7. Kind of wish a rare did that because you basically have to hard mulligan for the really good Thunder Mines that you want. But I do think the deck has a very interesting. I think they adapted Thunder Mine very well. I thought it was going to be more like, let's say, Nubatama, where you kind of like have to pitch a card for calling or something like that. But I guess that would be too good in standard. So I'm perfectly fine with how they did Thunder Mines, and I think it's perfectly faithful to the original, doing the minus power for when they guard and the attack does not hit. So I'm pretty happy with how Thunder Mine and 100 Demons turned out. So do let me know if you're building this deck and if it intrigues you. I think it's very interesting that we're getting kind of more like a control playstyle that punishes your opponent for doing certain things, like very faithful to the original 100 Demons. Again, I think the CB problem is a little bit issue. Boosters is kind of just a big issue among all the Buddyfight decks except for Tsuku because they have Jackknife Baby. This deck can call Peluda back from drop with the set order and it could be 13k booster, but again, that's only one and you still want to kill a rear off for the skill. You know, having Cocytus for double retire every turn is really good. Usually you won't have the gauge for that because Yamigedo is probably what you're spending most of your gauge on, as well as the, you know, set orders. But, you know, it's still very, very, like, a cohesive deck. This is just one wave of reveals, by the way. This is without any of the triggers. This is without any of the, This is about any of the triggers. This is about without any of the card of the days. So there should be at least a few more commons or rares or something that will get revealed. Like we had Shiden for Katano World. We got a bunch of stuff for Magic World. I think Chillax also for the heal that we got revealed yesterday or a few days ago is like amazing as well. So I'm really excited to see what the triggers are. Maybe they'll expect you to only play the generic triggers such as Ultimate Buddy and Damage Control, but I think that's still perfectly fine for this deck. Like giving Yamigedo more soul is just, you know, really good either way if you really need it, but like he'll be getting easy soul anyways. And, you know, if they're swinging into Yamigedo, that's one less attack you have to guard for that turn. So, anyways, that's basically my thoughts on the deck. I think it probably goes in the middle. I think it's better than Drum, a little bit better than Magic World. Probably somewhere on the same level or around Katano World. And then I think Tsuku's still the best deck. So, yeah, hopefully we'll get a date for when Kyoya Gaiden will get revealed. Y'all, I'll like mark that in my calendar and be like, ooh, Dragon Iron getting revealed. Let's see what this will do to Vanguard. But anyways, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.